Well, with the election less than 2 months away here in the great state of Texas and the United States, I've got a great guest on today that's running for railroad commissioner. And don't forget, elections on November 8th. I'll tell you about that and much more on this episode of The Crude Truth.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs, and if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
Well, welcome back to another episode of The Crude Truth. I'm just so excited today. I've got on a man that is running for office, not on the Republican side, but on the Democratic side for the Railroad Commission of Texas. I've got Luke Warford. Luke, how are you doing?
Hey, what's going on, Ray? Thanks for having me on. Good to see you, man.
Oh, great to see you and great to meet you. Thank you very much for coming on this episode of The Crude Truth. I think this is what embodies my show is that, well, you know, you are, I mean, I'll just say it, you are my first Democrat to be on the show.
Yeah.
But the show is called The Crude Truth, and we need to hear it from both sides. There's no ifs or buts about that.
Absolutely. And the issues, I mean, we're going to get into it, but the issues that are at stake in this race are not necessarily Republican, Democrat, or independent, right? They're just Texan issues. They're issues about job creation and energy leadership and clean air and clean water. And sort of the future of our state. That's what's at stake here. And those things shouldn't be partisan. So really appreciate you having me on. Good to be here.
Well, no, thank you very much. Well, first of all, you know, let's start at that all the way at the beginning because gosh knows, you know, we just have a certain amount of time and we don't want to, keep our listeners tied up all day. You know, we got to keep the productivity up.
Yeah.
But let's talk about you. Let's talk about where you're from, your background a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I've got an undergraduate degree in political science. I've got a master's degree from the London School of Economics. Spent most of my career working at the intersection of energy and policy. Like, energy is so important, oil and gas, but also renewables, just to everything, right? How our world functions, everything you're trying to do. You want to go to the grocery store, you want to work, everything, energy is everywhere, and it's so important. And so I've worked at international organizations like the World Bank and the African Union. I lived over in Ethiopia for a year working on energy and energy systems on the African continent. I was in consulting where I advised oil and gas companies directly, but also renewable companies in helping them navigate international markets, which I think is incredibly important right now, in particular with some of the uncertainty around Ukraine and what's going on with Russia. And then I've also worked in tech. So I worked with some of the most innovative companies in the world and understand not just sort of where our economy is, but also where it's going, right? And I think in particular with this office, with regulating the oil and gas industry, technology is playing already such a huge role, and it's going to continue to play such a huge role in the future of the industry. So I think having somebody in the office that understands where our economy is going is really important.
Absolutely. You know, I know that here in the great state of Texas, you mentioned the economy, oil and gas takes up at least a third of it.
Yeah.
We are, knock on wood, as of today, if I'm correct, still the largest producer of oil in the great United States of America.
Yeah.
I think we only still rival the Middle East.
Yeah.
And I say all those things because the economy is what, the oil is what moves the economy here. And so I'm very excited to hear you say those things. And I want to dive into a little bit of that background. You mentioned right now, Africa is a very hot topic because, we look at, I think on the outside looking in, we look at Africa as an emerging nations, because Africa's a big
emerging economies,
Thank you. Kind of like China and India. Now they're not at that level, as you know, coming up, but they are working towards that. And you know, that's one thing that I read this week. Maybe it was David Blackman or Steve Reeves that was talking about that our administration is now trying to tell Africa, don't drill, don't produce oil. And it's like, you know, why are we trying to continue to keep other countries down when we have China and India that are our partners? You know, India is a good, we have a great relationship. They're just buying cheap oil right now from Russia, which, you know what, I mean, I can't knock somebody for buying something for a better price, you know.
Right.
And the whole sanction thing, we won't even get into that today. But you know, what are your thoughts on that? You've been to Africa, that's why I wanted to kind of ask about that. You know, I haven't had anybody boots on the ground there to ask.
Well, so I think there's a few things, right? And I'll take your first point about Texas energy first, and then we would love to talk about the international side of it. You know, I'm incredibly proud of the history and the legacy and the strength of Texas oil and gas production, of Texas energy production. I think, you know, since Spindletop, the production here in this state has driven the United States economy, but really driven the global economy too. And I think, like, we as Texans should be so proud of that, and I am proud of that, and I think, frankly, it's something that folks in my party sometimes get wrong about oil and gas, is that they don't understand just how important it is to our economy, and to just everything that we do in the world. I think looking at the Railroad Commission in the office that I'm running for, you know, the way that I think about it, though, is that, like, Texas has more energy production capacity than any other state, right? Both oil and gas, renewables as well.
Right.
And our elected officials, and in particular our Railroad Commission, has been dealt this incredible hand with all of this natural resource wealth, right? And we should have affordable energy and reliable energy. But under this current administration at the Railroad Commission, we have neither of those things, right? We saw during last February's winter storm challenges with keeping the lights on. Right now, Texans are paying more for utility prices than our neighbors in Louisiana and Oklahoma and Arkansas. And that's because of policy decisions that the Texas Railroad Commission has made that are putting the interests of the folks who fund their campaigns ahead of the interests of people across the state. And so what I want to do is I want to get into this office, and I want to start to do what's best for the Texas oil and gas industry, for smaller producers, for people who work in the industry, because I genuinely think that they've been dealt this incredible hand. But, like, you take the flaring situation, for example, right? Flaring is sometimes necessary and is also has a negative impact on the reputation of Texas oil and gas. And under Wayne Christian, who's my opponent, they've granted thousands of flaring exemptions every year. They approve almost every flaring exemption. Like, we know flaring is bad, and yet has a negative impact. There's rules on the books that say you're not supposed to be able to flare after 10 days. There's some cases where there should be exemptions, but if you approve 100% of the exemptions, those are no longer exemptions, right? That's just changing the rule. That has a negative impact on Texas oil and gas producers and the people who are following the rules here in the state. They're basically letting a few bad actors spoil the reputation and spoil things for the whole bunch. And the reason I bring that up is because, connected to your question about international markets, right? We've seen a total shift in what is happening internationally in the last 12 months with everything happening with Russia and Ukraine. I think an argument that I've made, and then when I talk to producers, and especially independent producers, is, you know, they want to be able to sell their natural gas, in particular, to European buyers. Europeans are going to put a premium on lower emissions hydrocarbons. So what Texas producers need is they need a railroad commission that can reliably say, hey, these are lower emissions hydrocarbons. This is a clean product that we can sell. And I actually think lowering our emissions, getting our house in order in that way is good for business, sort of independent of what you think about climate change.
Right.
And then just coming back to your question about India, China, some of these emerging markets, right? A lot of what they're doing right now, a lot of the sources of energy there are coal or burning wood or all of these things that are really bad for our air, for the environment. And I think there's a big opportunity, and we're going to see this going forward, is an increase in demand for Texas oil and gas internationally. And we want to be set up to continue to take advantage of those opportunities and provide energy both here in Texas, but also to the world.
Well, when you mentioned, providing that oil to the world, I guess, and natural gas, I guess you're definitely for exporting the liquid natural gas to other parts of the world, and oil as well, which we do export.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen, really, not to belabor the point, but like we've seen so incredibly clearly that energy security is a national security issue, and that's for Texas, and it's also for our allies overseas. And so thinking about, how do we do what's best for both our state and our country, I think we need Texas oil and gas more now than we have ever before. And that's both from an energy security and national security standpoint, but it's also just from the standpoint of, again, we should have affordable, reliable energy here in the state.
Yeah. I will say this, that is one thing I do think that we all agree on, is that Texas oil is more important than it has been. I think probably since Spindletop, since we established ourselves as in my opinion, the best to do it. And of course, we are only second to the Middle East in production.
Yeah.
You also mentioned there about the technologies that we're going, where do you see the technology benefiting the oil and gas industry in a place like the flaring or the environment? Where can you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we should be doing, right, is we're going to need Texas oil and gas for a long time. And so the question for me is, how do we make it cleaner and safer as we're continuing production? And I think there's so many opportunities to use technology, whether it's better data infrastructure or artificial intelligence or automation, all of these things that are happening in the sector that can make things safer and cleaner, that can reduce emissions. There's, really exciting technology in carbon capture, in reducing, instead of burning off and wasting some of that flared gas that, especially with natural gas prices higher, has a real economic value in capturing that and getting more efficient and more cost effective at capturing that. The thing that I would say is, that innovation is being driven by the private sector, as it always is. And that's what we see here in the state. The thing that, I think we've seen too many times, not just in the energy sector, but in technology as well, is we often have government officials who are years or decades behind, who don't understand the technology or the industries that they're trying to regulate. And I think one of the benefits of me being a younger candidate who's worked in these industries, who understands innovation and technology, is that I have a better understanding of how things are working, but also where we're going, right? We want to, let's come back to our values here, which is, what do we want in 5 and 10 and 20 years? Is we want reliable, good-paying jobs. We want clean, safe production. We want to be able to keep the lights on. We want affordable energy. And in order to continue to be leaders in the way that we have been for a long time, we need to acknowledge, everyone knows the world is changing, right? Okay. And the question is just, how do we position ourselves in that changing world? And I think, my opponent still operates as if it's 1980 and nothing's changed, right? And I think there's just not a clearer comparison than that in terms of just understanding where our economy's going.
Well, I know in 1980, I think the TV show Dallas was probably the number one show. So, things have changed a little bit, but at the same time, that new show Yellowstone. Yeah. Things almost repeat themselves sometimes. Yeah.
We love Yellowstone, of course.
But you talk about the things that we need to do to move forward.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question: that right now the the government, this administration, and a lot of people in Washington. Now, I will bring this question back to Texas. Okay?
Yeah, please.
They're pushing for the Green New Deal. They're pushing for green energy like there's no tomorrow. They're, the regulations, and that'll be a question here in a minute, because as a small operator, those regulations are getting tougher and tougher. But how do you, how do you go to Washington basically and go, hey guys, how do you get the point across to them that oil and gas is still today and tomorrow? Like there's no, like you said it, turn the light switch on.
Yeah.
If they turn the light switch off today on oil and gas, then the light switch is off across America tomorrow, because they don't understand that oil and gas is what produces the electricity to turn the lights on. So how do you convey that message to this administration?
Look, I think a lot of people in Washington, and this is true in both parties, but definitely worse on the Democratic side, a lot of people in Washington just don't understand the importance of oil and gas, or of Texas oil and gas, and what is actually happening on the ground. They simply do not understand what's happening. And to be super clear, right, I am a Texan who is running for a Texas office to do what is best for the people of this state. Right. And that will not be shaped or influenced by whatever our national party in Washington does, whatever, Washington, D.C. Congress people from New York might throw around, right? That has no bearing on how I'm going to do this job. I'm going to do what's best for Texas. And I think there's just a huge opportunity to continue to drive Texas energy innovation forward, and thinking about, what are the emerging technologies? How can we continue to lead in that space while also needing Texas oil and gas? And I just think there cannot be a bigger contrast with my opponent, right? Where I'm here, our campaign is about doing what is best for the people of this state. And my opponent, in the last filing period, 99.6% of his campaign contributions came from the oil and gas executives that he's supposed to regulate. Not folks that work in the industry, but literally the top executives. He literally only got 25 contributions with, $10,000 each or something. And I just think no one would look at that and say that is okay, right? No one would look at that and say, this is a person who's serving the public interest. I think the last February's winter storm, and I know this shouldn't be a novel idea, but I was raised to think that our public servants should serve the public, right? Not their donors.
Yeah.
And I think no point makes this clearer than last February's winter storm, where this massive crisis happens, millions of people are without power, there's billions of dollars in damages, but a few companies Texas pipeline companies made billions of dollars during the storm in profits, right?
Okay.
And the Railroad Commission, instead of trying to fix the problem and create a strong weatherization standard and say, hey, this is a big issue, we're gonna fix it, they've instead used that storm as an opportunity to pass those billions in profits on to Texas consumers that people across the state are now paying for in terms of higher utility bills, an average of $45 a month higher utility bills across the state. And to understand why they did that, I think you just follow the campaign contributions. Look at those pipeline executives whose campaigns they're funding. You look at the short list of those 25 people that gave Wayne Christian money. Right. Those are the same people that made a huge amount of profits during the winter storm. And so I just think we've got this system where it's a small group of people who are being influenced by big money and by a very small group of executives, and that those folks have too much power, and it's bad for Texas consumers, but it's also bad for people that work in the industry, right? The pipelines, the Railroad Commission literally was founded to prevent monopoly behavior in the railroads originally, but they understood that was a threat in oil and gas. And what we've got the Commission essentially protecting pipeline monopoly powers, right? The pipelines have way too much power, whether it's with the power plants or with producers. just because there isn't transparency in the interstate gas market. And the reason that it exists, like, just follow the money.
Gotcha. So basically, you said something there. It's like, hey, you want to focus on the people that are in office are the ones that don't know. Is that what you're saying about up in Washington, or the ones here in Texas?
Well, I think it's both the case. I think there are plenty of Washington politicians who are out of touch and don't understand what's happening here in Texas. But I also think Wayne Christian has been in elected office. He's a former gospel singer who's been in elected office since 1997. Okay. He has no oil and gas experience. He has no expertise in the industry. And he actively works against emerging technologies. He actively, is attacking or sort of behaving as if the world isn't changing. This is a guy who has said that he thinks the answer to climate change is turning up the air conditioning, right? That's not a serious statement. That's not a statement that I want to hear from our elected officials. And frankly, it just doesn't seem like he wants to do the job. We've asked him to debate. We've tried to engage in, one of the biggest challenges around the Texas Railroad Commission is that people don't know what it does. They don't know how it impacts their lives. And so we're for more transparency. We're using our whole campaign to educate folks across the state about why this office matters and why it's so important. And he's, nowhere to be seen, right? To the point where he won't debate. He doesn't want you to know what he does. He doesn't want you to know that they could have prevented the grid failure, that you're paying more for utilities because of the decisions they're making, because for so long there has been no accountability. But I think, and I've heard this from folks across the state that, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, that they're frustrated with the failures in leadership at the Railroad Commission, and that they're looking to vote for, someone who actually wants to do the job, which is why I'm running. Well,
I will, with what you just talked about with the electric bills, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that on another little podcast I've been doing called Three Podcasters Walk Into a Bar with a couple of buddies of mine. I've mentioned it on that, and because it's not a big topic here in the United States, that Germany right now is seeing a 400 to 1,000% increase in their energy bills. And it's like, it's going to come here to the United States as a whole, and we need to let people know to get prepared. I heard one deal the other day that somebody was going to shopping for the electricity. They were at about 6.5 cents. And now they're finding the cheapest was like 11 cents a kilowatt. So guess what? That's that's a 100% raise.
Right.
And so it means if you're paying $300 a month, you're going to be up to $600 a month. And you mentioned it, and it is a good thing, especially for the small or for independents. That the natural gas prices have gone up. I don't know exactly where we're at today, but we're somewhere between $7 and $8 an MCF. Oil is, I'm going to say, based on my predictions, it is a little low right now. I do think $100 at least until 2024 is going to be the average across the board. Meaning I think we're probably going to see 110, 120 again before it's over. But anyway, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something that needs to be talked about, that, hey, people just need to be prepared. They need to start putting away some rainy day funds or something, because, there is stuff that we can control, and there is some things that we can't control that's causing these prices to go up. I mean, I never thought we'd see $9 natural gas again.
Right.
And sure enough, we've gone up 400% in the last 6 months, from $2 an MCF to $9 an MCF.
Well, and I think it's super important to understand, right? And just to sort of frame it for folks, like, utility prices have gone up 70% in the last year across Texas, right? Wow. And so I think it doesn't get enough, this issue does not get enough media coverage, but I hear about it everywhere I go from everyone I talk to. Folks are worried about their utility bills going up, because if the average is 70%, that means, some people's bills have gone up, as you said, they've doubled or worse. And some of that is, again, outside of our control or determined by what's happening in international markets, what's happening overseas. But I do think there are decisions that the Texas Railroad Commission is making that are resulting in people paying higher utility bills. One, as I mentioned, the surcharges from the winter storm last February, like people, there's this misconception that that's paying for preparations for the next storm. That's not what it's doing. It's paying back the debt and the profits that a small number of companies made during the storm. And, one of the things the Railroad Commission is supposed to do is it's supposed to prevent price gouging, right? And I don't know if price gouging happened during last February's winter storm, but certainly, prices went up 300x overnight. The commission should be, and retroactively as well, right? The commission should be working with the Attorney General to investigate that, to make sure that there was no nefarious behavior, to make sure that Texas consumers aren't being footed with the bill. And they just haven't done anything, right? They just don't seem up to the task. And I think, we see that with some of the monopolistic or predatory pricing on the part of some of the pipelines, where, again, we're just calling for more transparency, right? And you see the railroad commissioners throwing around the term free market, but they don't understand, like, Econ 101, like, free markets have competition, right? And a competitive market has more information, has transparency, and we don't have those things right now. And the result is that it's hurting Texas producers, it's hurting Texas consumers as well.
You mentioned price gouging, and I've got to say this, that I hope nobody, and I mean nobody, is price gouging, because that hurts the American people.
100%.
And what makes me, the first thing that came to mind was President Biden last month saying that oil and gas companies are price gouging, and that's a federal crime. And so he was probably making a blatant lie to make us look bad, because if that was true, he needs to go investigate it immediately and do those things. So if that's true, I would like to think that we would be invested, because there's one thing I do believe in, and that is helping out your fellow Texan.
Right.
And yes, I said Texan, yes, American too. Don't get me wrong.
No, but Texan.
And when you read the good book, God asks you, hey, help anybody out that may need it. In fact, I heard a story one time about somebody with jumper cables. They asked me if I had a pair, and I said, man, I'm sorry, I don't. I went and asked somebody else, hey, do you have a pair? And they go, oh yeah, I do. Why do you need them? I said, no, I just met a guy who needs them. He goes, oh no. I'm like, why do you have jumper cables?
Right. What's the whole point? Well, and it's something that's so great. I mean, that's what we love about Texans, right? Like, we look out for each other.
Yes,
we care about our neighbors, and that's what we expect from our neighbors and our friends. We should also expect that from our elected officials as well. Anyway,
no, you're right, Luke. And that's one thing that I've learned in the last little while is service over self. And I think that is, and not to the first example that came to mind, and again, I don't know the man personally, is President Trump, and why I can't understand a billionaire on paper, whether he's got it or not, wants to go be president. Man, that's already made, because usually everybody that becomes president makes all their money while they're president. But anyway, let's get back to topic here. What is one major issue, because you are running for railroad commission?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so let's stick with the railroad commission. What is one major issue right now that you see in the railroad commission?
Well, and so, but I want to touch on, and I'll answer your question. But I would love to touch on the price gouging point, where just to be really clear, the problem here is not like, oh, we know there was price gouging and they're not doing anything about it. It's that they haven't even investigated, right? They're not even looking into this. One of their jobs is to make sure that that type of thing doesn't happen, that price gouging doesn't happen, because we obviously understand that it is a crime, that it is bad, that it's very serious. And they just aren't even acknowledging it, right? They're saying, this isn't our problem. This isn't our job. That's what we see over and over and over again at the commission. And I also just want to touch on your point about service over self, right? Where the way that I was raised, our public officials are public servants, right? It's literally public service. You're supposed to serve the public. And we've gotten into this position in American politics, and a lot of time, and for a lot of folks here in Texas as well, where they're just not serving the public. They're using those positions of power to hold on to power or advance the interests of themselves and their friends. And that has a real impact on people across the state. And so to answer your question, I mean, we're talking about making sure that folks can keep the lights on. We're talking about lowering utility prices. We're talking about protecting our air and our water. But I think, in general, as Texas Railroad Commissioner, we need somebody who actually wants to do the job, and this cuts across politics, who wants to do the job, who understands that these are complex, difficult issues that really matter, right? That really have an impact on people across our state, and who's going to get into office and actually do that and serve the public and do that relentlessly. And, I think I've shown across this campaign that I'm going to work hard, that I'm going to fight for people. And I think people are seeing that, right? And in our most recent poll, we're down by 4 points from Wayne Christian, right? And that's statewide for a Democrat. No Democrat has won this office since 1990, right?
I believe, yeah.
In 30 years. And when I was 1 year old last time a Democrat won for the Texas Railroad Commission. But I think people are frustrated, sort of across the political spectrum, because the issues that we're talking about are not, we are the energy capital of the world, and people understand that there's something wrong when hundreds of Texans freeze to death, or when we're paying more for utility prices, or when you can't drink the water in the Permian Basin, or, the people are getting cancer and dying because of radiation from benzene from in their water. And so I just think no one is looking at this situation and saying like, oh yeah, that's working out great.
Well, I mean, it's definitely one of those things. You've listed off several different deals there, from the drinking water in the Permian to the
happy to talk about anything.
And I do know that the majority of the oil and gas companies here in the great state of Texas care about Texas.
100%.
From conservation. I mean, I love to hunt. I love to fish. Okay. But I know that if I shoot all the deer this year, and I'll go with my little axiom, I don't know if I shoot all the deer this year, guess what? There are going to be no deer next year.
Right.
Okay. So, and I know that if I catch all the redfish this year and are down in Port Aransas this year, there will be none. So there is conservation is very important. The environment is very important because it is what gives us, the environment, the earth gives us this oil. And our bread and butter at Pecos Country Operating has been buying older leases, producing, reworking old wells, and producing and drilling and producing new wells from these old leases. However, when we're getting these older leases, we're working with the Railroad Commission hand over fist, and they're really handing me stuff to do. It's like, hey, this stuff was drilled in 1940 something, or I've got one that I've got 2 or 3 wells that are older than my father that are still producing today. And my father's 70 years old. So those we have to watch like a hawk. We got to test them every year. Then let's talk about when we actually got to plug a well. We got to go through all the proper procedures. The railroad commissioners, those gentlemen, depending on what section or division they're in of the state, they come out and they watch. So I do know that as a whole, that a lot of the independents and the big companies, because they can't afford the issues as well on a public scale of a media. I can't imagine, you get a small spill, what happened with with Exxon, or heaven forbid, well, we had the Valdez, okay?
Right.
And that was horrible. 1988, I think that was. Anyway, but there are some places where some things do happen, and 9 times out of 10, those oil and gas companies are jumping hand over fist to get it fixed because, nobody wants to get cancer. Obviously, that's not the goal here. We want to provide to make sure that the lights come on every day. That I don't know if you ever watched. There's a good documentary called Spoiled. It's a SP capital OIL. And it really lets you know how important the oil and gas industry is to your everyday life, or turning on a switch, and like you said, getting to and from work and being able to produce at work.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but anyway, you win. Okay. Your first day in office would be what, January 20th, give or take. What's the first thing?
Whenever the legislature moves. Well, and to your point, I keep doing this. But I think it's about stewardship, right? And to be super clear, the Railroad Commission's part of their mission is to be good stewards of our natural resources. And I just think, to your point, the vast majority of people that work in the industry, the vast majority of operators are following the rules and doing what's right and doing what's best for Texans. Yeah. There are a few bad actors who are not following the rules. And the reason that we have a railroad commission is to identify those bad, and that's them not following the rules is hurting everyone else, right? And the reason that we have a railroad commission is to try to identify those bad actors and prevent some of the worst case stuff. I think they're getting the balance wrong. You know what I mean? And I don't think anybody that works in the industry, we're headed to the Permian later today, but I was out there a couple weeks ago talking to a geologist who had worked in the industry for 20 years. It's like, this is his career. And he says to me, this is what I've done. This is what I know. This is how I've provided for my family, how I'm going to send my kids to college. But I'm sick of coming home and my neighbors thinking that I'm, contaminating their groundwater or poisoning their air. And there's people understand that there's a balance that we need to strike here. Absolutely. And I just think and folks that work in the industry, the vast majority of them are leading that because they have those values. It's just our elected officials are failing in doing their role, and their role is to identify bad actors and make sure that they're not messing it up for everybody else.
You're absolutely right about these guys that are coming home, and they're it's almost in a way, and I'm going to use a comparison, and I don't mean it is that during Vietnam, those men were coming home to people that weren't supporting them.
Right.
Okay. Right now, these people that are protesting are using permanent markers that use some form of petroleum to put on the cardboard that's made, and they're drinking plastic water bottles. So it's like, guys, I'd love to see somebody truly protest the right way. You show up in some buffalo skin that you did yourself, that's what you're wearing, and you've got a bullhorn of some kind because that's natural. Yeah. But no, okay. Let's get back to this. First day in office. Come on. So what do you want to do?
I mean, I'm an extroverted guy, so I'm gonna go around the office, talk to everyone, try to understand what's working, what's not. I think it's easy for somebody to be on the campaign trail and I'm talking about what Wayne Christian in particular is doing wrong.
Well, that's who you're running
against. Right, of course. But I want to know, I want to talk to the people who have been doing this work for a long time, who work for the Railroad Commission, who are trying and doing their best, how to better support them. I think, our priorities obviously are around the grid and around utility prices and around clean air and clean water, protecting the environment. But I do think there is a level of humility that you need to go in with on day one and just want to listen and learn and understand, because that's the way you can really move things forward, right? Is by getting more information and having a clear understanding of what's actually happening. Yeah.
Well, I also want to say this, that I've got to do my plug for the Crude Truth, and you said it today, which was a few bad apples ruin it for the rest of us. And that's in anything in life, and that's the Crude Truth right there, that a few bad apples will do that. So I wanted to say that. I know we're getting running short on time.
Yeah, of course.
So I want you to give your plug, tell people where they can find you, and tell people why you need to be the next Railroad Commissioner of Texas, and do it.
Of course. So our website is just lukewarford.com. You can go there to get more information on our campaign. The election is on November 8th. Make sure to vote. Make sure to get your friends to vote. I think, we've obviously touched on a lot of issues today about why you should vote for me, but I just genuinely care deeply about these issues and want to do the job and want to do what's best for Texans. And that's what I'm committed to doing on day one at the Texas Railroad Commission. That's what I'll do for my full term in office. So looking forward to the last less than 7 weeks to go until the election, the final stretch. And, thanks everybody for your attention, and thanks for everything you're doing. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It means a lot to come on, to be the first Democrat to come on this podcast, because again, so many of these issues are just not partisan, right? They shouldn't be. And it's just about what's about doing what's best for our state and for
Yes.
the people of our state, and that's what I'm committed to doing as Texas Railroad Commissioner.
Well, Luke, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Again, I think I told you this during just a few minutes before. It's like, I'm going to go with the Fox News guy, Brett Barry, and I want to be fair and balanced. I welcome anybody on the show because you know what, the crude truth isn't anything that we're talking about. And when you sit down and you talk with somebody, you actually can find a common ground.
Yeah.
And that's the important part. And here the common ground is what's best for the great state of Texas.
Yep.
And I think you have several individuals. There's another person running too. You got Wayne Christian, you got yourself and Jaime, is that correct? Or Jamie? Jaime?
Yeah, Jaime.
Jaime.
Yeah.
And so,
I think there's a Green Party candidate.
good,
So,
good for him.
Yeah.
Or her, or them, whatever it is these days.
Yeah.
But you know what? The common thread, though, for all of you ladies and gentlemen, is that you want to do what's best for Texas. And that's the most important part, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, Luke, again, thank you so much for coming on, and hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you. Well, that's it on this episode of The Crude Truth. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.